They say life imitates art. But what happens when art becomes a blueprint for murder? This is the story of a woman who dreamed of writing the perfect crime novel, then decided to live it. Nancy Crampton-Brophy was not a name many people knew until the day her husband was found shot dead in the culinary school where he taught. At first, the community grieved. Daniel Brophy was a beloved teacher, passionate about food, science, and life. He had arrived early that morning, as he always did, to prepare his classroom. But minutes later, he was lying on the floor, bleeding from 2 gunshot wounds, one in the back and one in the chest. There were no signs of forced entry. Nothing was stolen. Just a lifeless body and a silence that stunned everyone. The investigation started like any other. Detectives questioned colleagues and students. There were no immediate suspects. No clear motive. Just confusion and mourning. Until one name surfaced again and again: Nancy, the wife. A 68-year-old aspiring novelist who seemed composed, too composed, some said. But it wasn't just her demeanor that raised eyebrows. It was something else. Something she had written. Years earlier, Nancy had published an essay titled "How to Murder Your Husband." In it, she detailed various ways a woman might kill her spouse and get away with it. From staged robberies to poisonings, she laid out methods, motives, and alibis. It was a fictional piece, she claimed. A creative exploration. But now, with her husband dead under suspicious circumstances, fiction started to look a lot like premeditation. Detectives dug deeper. They began to piece together Nancy's life, not the version on social media filled with loving photos and anniversary posts, but the hidden version. Financial records revealed that Nancy and Daniel were struggling. They were deeply in debt. Their home was mortgaged to the hilt. Credit cards were maxed out. Then came the insurance policies. Daniel had several life insurance policies totaling nearly $1.5 million, with Nancy as the sole beneficiary. Suddenly, motive came into sharp focus. The timeline also raised questions. On the morning of Daniel's death, surveillance cameras captured Nancy's car driving to and from the school, something she had initially denied. She claimed she was home that morning, relaxing and writing. But the camera told a different story. Her presence near the crime scene, coupled with her earlier essay, cast a long, chilling shadow. The murder weapon was never found. But investigators discovered that Nancy had bought a ghost gun kit online, an untraceable firearm assembled from parts. She had purchased a Glock-style slide and barrel and had visited a gun range. She claimed it was all research for her writing. But to the prosecution, it looked like she had done her homework too well. In court, the prosecution painted a damning portrait. They argued that Nancy had orchestrated a calculated, cold-blooded murder. That she had fantasized about killing her husband for years, and when financial pressures mounted, she acted. Her essay, How to Murder Your Husband, became central to the case. Though the judge initially ruled that it couldn't be used as evidence, its mere existence loomed over the trial like a ghost. Nancy's defense team insisted she was innocent. They said she loved her husband, that the marriage was solid, that the financial difficulties were manageable. They claimed the essay was satire, a piece of writing meant to entertain, not indict. But the jury wasn't convinced. In 2022, Nancy Crampton-Brophy was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. She is now known not for her novels, but for a real-life crime that shocked the world. A writer who turned fiction into reality. A story where the line between imagination and action blurred and then vanished. But the question that continues to haunt people isn't just whether Nancy killed her husband. It's why. Was it truly about money? Or was there something deeper, something darker, lurking beneath the surface? Was this a crime born of desperation? Or of obsession? Nancy spent years writing about murder. Planning it, structuring it, crafting motive and opportunity in her stories. Was it inevitable that one day she would step into her own plot? Those who knew Daniel described him as kind, generous, and endlessly curious. A man who loved mushrooms and hiking. Who spent his weekends gardening and tinkering in the kitchen. A gentle soul who seemed incapable of inspiring hatred. That such a man would meet such a violent end, and possibly at the hands of the person he trusted most, adds a tragic irony to this tale. The media seized on the story. Headlines screamed, "Author of How to Murder Your Husband accused of doing just that." the case became a twisted parable. It wasn't just the crime that gripped people. It was the idea that someone could write a fantasy and then choose to live it. That fiction could become a confession. For aspiring writers, it was a cautionary tale. Be careful what you imagine, because sometimes imagination has consequences. Nancy's books had never reached bestseller lists. But in the end, her most famous story was one she never published, the killing of her own husband. Even in prison, Nancy has maintained her innocence. She insists she loved Daniel, that she's being punished for being a writer with a dark sense of humor, that her essay was just that, an essay. But the facts remain. Her husband is dead, she lied about her whereabouts, she bought gun parts, and she stood to gain financially, and then there's the eerie precision of her writing. In How to Murder Your Husband, she wrote, "Divorce is expensive, and do you really want to split your assets?" She talked about making the murder look like a burglary. She warned against using hitmen and recommended a more personal touch. To many, it read like a checklist. The case has been the subject of documentaries, podcasts, and debate. Was Nancy a sociopath hiding in plain sight? Or a misunderstood artist caught in a nightmare of coincidence? Was her writing a mask for her intentions or merely an unfortunate piece of evidence used against her? What makes the story so chilling isn't just the crime itself. It's how ordinary everything seemed. Nancy and Daniel lived in a quiet Portland neighborhood. They went on walks, attended dinners, hosted friends. No one saw it coming. And yet, the clues were there, hidden in plain sight, between the lines of a blog post, in the pages of a book, in the surveillance footage, in a lie told softly. True crime stories often ask what drives someone to kill. In Nancy's case, the answer may never be fully known. Money, yes, but also perhaps ego, control, the desire to write her own ending. And ironically, that ending became her downfall. She tried to create the perfect murder, but like most fiction, it unraveled under scrutiny. This story is more than just a murder case. It's a psychological mirror. It asks how far someone will go when fantasy collides with opportunity. It shows how dangerous a mind can be when it's used to crafting lies and believing them. Nancy's world was one where fiction became fact, and the cost was a man's life. As Nancy sits behind bars, the world continues to dissect her story. Not as a novelist, but as a murderer. And in a strange, unsettling twist, she finally got what every writer dreams of: people reading her work, quoting her lines, discussing her ideas. Only not in bookstores or book clubs, but in courtrooms and documentaries. Daniel Brophy deserved better. A man who taught students to nourish others through food became a victim of a woman who nourished fantasies of murder. His legacy is now overshadowed by her crime, but he should be remembered not as a plot device, but as a person. A husband. A teacher. A life taken too soon. In the end, the story of Nancy Crampton-Brophy isn't just about murder. It's about how dangerous words can be when they're backed by action. It's about the thin line between imagination and execution. And it's about how the most terrifying stories aren't found in novels, but in real life, when someone decides to turn the page from fiction to fatal.